The city died not with a scream, but with a slow, white exhale. The forecasters had called it the storm of the century, and for once, they were not wrong. It began as a persistent sigh at dusk, fat flakes ghosting past streetlights, and escalated into a howling, biblical fury by midnight. It swallowed sound, then landmarks, and finally, hope. Within its frozen gullet, stranded in a sedan that was little more than a metal coffin leaching cold, was Lyra Vance. Her breath fogged the windshield in ragged, panicked clouds. The engine had choked to silence an hour ago, the gas gauge resting on a hollow E. The money for fuel had gone to the last vial of medicine, now rattling emptily in her purse. Every cent, every hope, had been poured into the sinking ship of her life, the charming little cafe with its peeling lavender paint, finally padlocked by the bank 3 days prior. The eviction notice was a fresh wound, a crisp rectangle of doom on her damp passenger seat. But these were abstract agonies compared to the very real, whistling sound coming from the back seat. Jude. Her 4-year-old son was bundled in every scrap of clothing they had in the car, a small, shivering mound beneath a thin blanket. His asthma, a constant specter, had seized the opportunity the cold and stress provided. Each inhale was a desperate, reedy struggle, each exhale a faint, alarming whine. The emergency inhaler was down to a single, pathetic puff. The digital clock, powered by the dying car battery, had frozen at 2:17 a.m. The world beyond the windows was a swirling, blinding void. The phone in her hand was a dead brick. They were buried alive in this glacial tomb. A sound, lower and more visceral than the storm's cry, tore from her throat. It was the sound of a mother animal caught in a trap. She could not, would not, let the ending be here. Not in this car. With a force born of sheer terror, she shoved the driver's door open against the mounting drift, the wind instantly slapping the breath from her lungs. She scooped Jude from the back seat, wrapping him in the blanket, tucking his face against her neck to shield him from the lacerating ice. She had no plan, only direction. Somewhere, in the industrial wasteyard of warehouses and condemned buildings they drifted into, there had to be shelter. A doorway. An overhang. Anything. She stumbled through a labyrinth of white, her boots plunging into unseen depths, the weight of her son and her despair slowing her to a torturous slog. Just as her muscles began to shriek in surrender, a light pierced the gauze of snowfall. Not the sterile blue of a street lamp, but a warm, golden glow emanating from a single, tall window on the second floor of a formidable brick building. A sign, discreet and rusted, read, "The Aviary." She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew it, in the way one knows the location of a dormant volcano. A social club, they called it. A place for private discussions. A stronghold of Caspian thorn. The knowledge was a bolt of ice down her spine, sharper than the cold. To approach that door was to walk willingly into the mouth of a different kind of storm. But Jude's wheezing was a metronome counting down to 0. The light was life. She climbed the slick, ice-covered steps, her knees buckling, and used the last of her strength to pound against the heavy, reinforced door. Silence. Then, the scrape of multiple bolts. The door opened not to a sliver, but wide, revealing a scene of suspended violence. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke and tension. 20 men, all in dark, tailored clothing, were frozen in various states of alertness around a large green felt table scattered with cards and thick stacks of cash. Hands hovered near hidden holsters. Every eye, hard and assessing, locked onto her. And at the center, rising from a high-backed chair like a king from a throne, was him. Caspian Thorne was not a man of cartoonish menace, his danger was in his absolute stillness. Late 30s, with hair the color of polished slate and eyes that were a disconcertingly pale gray, like winter ice over a deep lake. He didn't speak. He merely looked, his gaze traveling from her snow-plastered hair, down her cheap, soaked coat, to the precious bundle in her arms. Lyra's voice, when it came, was a raw, shattered thing, stripped of everything but need. "We need shelter, please." It wasn't a demand, nor a beggar's whine. It was a stark statement of fact, hurled into the silent, dangerous room. One of the men, a mountain with a scar through his eyebrow, took a step forward. "Boss, let me handle." Caspian raised a single finger. The man stopped as if yanked by a chain. Caspian's eyes never left Lyra's. He saw the bankruptcy in the wear of her gloves, the eviction in the hollows of her cheeks, the single-minded love and the ferocity with which she held her child. He saw a problem utterly divorced from the calculus of his world. And it fascinated him. "This is a private establishment," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that somehow carried over the howling wind at her back. "You are interrupting." "I know," she whispered, her defiance sparking, fueled by desperation. "But the storm, my son, he can't breathe. Just a corner. A closet. Until it passes." Her arms tightened around Jude, whose weak cough was the loudest sound in the room. Caspian's gaze flicked to the child, then back to her. He moved then, walking toward her with a predator's liquid grace. He stopped a foot away, close enough for her to smell the subtle spice of his cologne and the cold clinging to his wool coat. He didn't touch her. He was studying a specimen, a rare bird that had flown into his gilded cage of its own accord. "Shelter is not free," he stated, the words final as a judge's gavel. "Medicine is not free. Salvation is not free." He paused, letting the truth of his words sink into her, colder than the storm. "I can provide all three. A warm room. A doctor here within 10 minutes. And the financial ruin dogging your steps? Erased." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird. "I have nothing to pay you with." A ghost of something, not a smile, but the idea of one, touched his lips. "You have yourself. Not as a cleaner. Not as a server." He glanced around his domain, at the hardened faces of his men. "This world, it has a way of calcifying the soul. You will be my anchor. A living reminder. You and the boy will live under my protection, in my home. You will be present. You will normalize the atmosphere. Your debt will be your presence. A daily testament to a mercy I am not known for." It was insanity. A deal with a devil whose contract was written in shadows. She looked past him, at the grim-faced men, the cards, the guns no one bothered to fully conceal. Then she looked down at Jude's pale, fluttering eyelids. The wheeze. The final, fading puff of medicine in her bag. She was not choosing a future. She was choosing the next 5 minutes. She met his winter-gray eyes, seeing no warmth, only a stark, transactional clarity. "Yes," she said, the word leaving her lips like a vow. "Just help him." Caspian gave a single, slow nod. He stepped aside, not to usher her in, but to reveal the path into the heart of his kingdom. "Rook," he said to the scarred man, his tone shifting back to one of effortless command. "Call Dr. Alves. The rest of you, the game is concluded. Our priorities have shifted." Lyra Vance, clutching her son, crossed the threshold. The heavy door thudded shut behind her, sealing out the blizzard and sealing in her fate. The cold began to seep from her bones, replaced by a new, profound chill, the understanding that she had just traded one desperate element for another, and the storm she had entered was only just beginning. The transition from a freezing car to Caspian Thorne's penthouse was not an ascent into heaven, but a translocation to a beautifully appointed plane of existence that operated under different physical and moral laws. The elevator, a silent, bronze-paneled capsule, opened not into a foyer, but into a panorama of cloud and steel. The penthouse spanned the entire top floor of a seemingly derelict warehouse, its walls made of reinforced glass and cold, polished concrete. It was a fortress disguised as an eyrie, a testament to a taste that was severe, exquisite, and devoid of sentimental clutter. To Lyra, standing there in her damp, salt-stained boots, it felt less like a home and more like the observation deck of a powerful, remote deity. Her first week was a study in surreal dislocation. A doctor, a brisk and efficient woman named Alves with knowing eyes, had indeed arrived within minutes that first night, tending to Jude with a quiet professionalism that asked no questions. Jude now slept in a room that was a child's dream, filled with soft, tasteful toys, a bed shaped like a racing car, and an air filtration system that hummed a constant, reassuring lullaby. Lyra's own adjoining room was a study in minimalist luxury, a wardrobe stocked with clothes that fit her perfectly and felt like a second skin made of cashmere and silk. Everything was provided for, yet everything came with the unspoken weight of the ledger. Her role as an anchor began to take on a bizarre, ritualistic shape. Her days were not filled with drudgery, but with a tense, performative normalcy. In the mornings, she would make breakfast in the stark, professional kitchen. Caspian would often join them, a newspaper in hand, his presence a dark star warping the domestic gravity of the scene. He would watch, his pale eyes missing nothing, the way she buttered Jude's toast, the simple lullabies she hummed, the gentle cadence of her scoldings. He was an ethnographer studying a foreign species called family. The first formal test came 3 days in. Caspian instructed her to dine with him that evening. The table was set for 2, a low crystal centerpiece holding a single, black orchid. The food was sublime, but the conversation was a minefield. He questioned her about her past, not with empathy, but with the analytical curiosity of a surgeon probing a wound. He dissected her failed business, his critique razor-sharp and unforgivingly accurate. When she flinched, a spark of defiance rising to her cheeks, he merely tilted his head. "Sentiment is the syrup in which fools drown their ventures," he stated, sipping his wine. "You loved the idea of the cafe more than you understood the mechanics of survival. A fatal error." She wanted to hurl her own accusations, to scream about unfair rents and predatory suppliers, but the memory of Jude breathing easily in the next room sealed her lips. She was a living reminder of mercy, and reminders do not argue. The men in his employ were studies in contrast. Rook, the scarred lieutenant, was a constant, glowering presence. He viewed her as a vulnerability, a strange softness his boss had inexplicably allowed into the sanctum. His interactions with her were clipped, his body a wall of contained violence always positioned between her and the more sensitive areas of the penthouse. Valencia, however, was different. A woman with a sleek dark bob and eyes that held a frightening perceptiveness, she moved through the masculine energy of Caspian's world with the lethal grace of a stiletto blade. She was the one who brought Jude a sophisticated puzzle from Switzerland, who left a novel by Lyra's favorite author on a side table with no comment. Her kindness was strategic, but it was a currency Lyra desperately needed. The forced proximity became its own language. Caspian's world was one of controlled entries and exits, but within the penthouse, their orbits were inescapably drawn together. He would find her reading to Jude in the sun-drenched living room and would stand in the doorway, a silent, imposing shadow, listening until the story was done. Once, when reaching for the same rare volume in his library of first editions, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact was electric, a static shock that seemed to freeze the very air. He did not pull away immediately, his gaze dropping to the point of connection before rising to her face, reading the confusion and the unwanted thrill that flickered there. It was in these moments that the anchor concept twisted into something more complex. She was not just a reminder of mercy, she was becoming a mirror, reflecting back at him a version of himself he had thought buried, a man who could feel the simple heat of skin. This dangerous intimacy was shattered one evening by a brutal lesson. Caspian was conducting a meeting in his study, a discussion with a trembling man in a ruined suit about a substantial debt. Lyra, under instruction, sat in a plush armchair in the corner, a piece of living decor. She was to be calm, to project an aura of mundane peace. As the man's pleas grew more desperate, Caspian, without raising his voice, delivered a sentence that was both financial and physical annihilation. The man sobbed. Caspian's eyes, cold as river stones, flickered to Lyra. He was watching her reaction, testing the strength of his anchor against the tide of his reality. She kept her face a placid mask, her hands folded neatly in her lap, even as her stomach churned with visceral horror. When the man was led away, broken, Caspian dismissed the others and approached her. "You did not look away," he said, a note of perverse approval in his voice. "You didn't instruct me to," she replied, her own voice barely a whisper. He leaned close, his breath a warm contrast to the ice in his words. That man's failure would have collapsed 3 legitimate businesses, cost 50 people their jobs. My resolution contained the damage. Mercy, in my world, is not forgiveness. It is the precise application of violence to prevent greater suffering. Remember that. That night, the gilded cage felt truly like a prison. Yet, paradoxically, when she lay awake, listening to Jude's even breaths, the face that haunted her was not the sobbing debtor's, but Caspian's, the stark, ruthless intelligence of him, the warped code that somehow enclosed her and her son in a bubble of terrifying safety. She was adrift in a sea of monsters, and she had somehow become the cherished possession of the most fearsome leviathan of them all. The line between captive and something else was thinning, stretched taut by fear, fascination, and the undeniable, terrifying pull of his focused attention. The turning point was not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, seismic shift in the bedrock of their arrangement. It began with the sharing of silence. Caspian, who had once used Lyra's presence as a tool to gauge his own effect on the mundane, now seemed to seek it out for its own unsettling quietude. He would find her in the library, not to observe, but to occupy the same space, reading a dense treatise on geopolitical strategy while she pored over a novel. The silence between them thickened, charged with unspoken thoughts and the memory of that single, electric touch. It was no longer the silence of a specimen under glass, it was the silence of two predators, circling, aware of each other's every breath. His confessions came in fragments, like shards of dark pottery piecing together the urn of his history. He spoke not of childhood trauma, but of philosophy, forged in the fire of necessity. Over a game of chess one evening, his long fingers hovering over a rook, he said, "You think my world is chaos given form. You are wrong. It is a meticulous ecosystem. The violence you witness is the immune response. A tumor grows, a greedy policeman, a treacherous ally, a spreading addiction in a neighborhood I control, and it must be cut out. Cleanly. Brutally. To do less is to allow the sickness to consume the host." He captured her queen with a soft, decisive click. "Your world, with its courts and loans and polite evictions, is just a more hypocritical version. It simply uses paper cuts instead of knives." Lyra, her defiance no longer a spark but a slow-burning coal, moved her remaining bishop. "And where is the line? When does the surgery become the disease?" He looked up, and for the first time, she saw not cold calculation, but a flicker of genuine, albeit grim, engagement. "The line," he said softly, "is the point where the act no longer serves a purpose beyond personal pleasure. I do not take pleasure in it, Lyra. I take satisfaction. In the order it restores." This intellectual intimacy became the kindling for a more dangerous fire. He began to orchestrate experiences, not for Jude's sake, nor purely for hers, but as experiments in a life he could observe but never truly inhabit. A private, after-hours tour of the Natural History Museum, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous halls of skeletons and gemstones. A closed park, its gates locked to the public, where Jude could run on the manicured grass under the watchful eyes of Rook and Valencia. Caspian stood apart, a statue in a fine wool coat, but his eyes followed Lyra as she pushed Jude on a swing, her laughter a strange, melodic sound in the silent green space. He was curating normality, and in doing so, highlighting its absolute fragility and his power to grant it. The physical tension, a live wire since the library, finally snapped. It happened after a tense day where a business negotiation had frayed his controlled demeanor to its limits. He found her on the penthouse's vast terrace, staring out at the city lights, hugging herself against the chill. He didn't speak. He simply turned her to face him, his gaze a storm of frustration and something darker, hungrier. The kiss was not an offer, it was a conquest, a claiming. It was teeth and desperation and a fury that felt directed at the universe, but was channeled entirely through her. She fought for a moment, a reflex of the self she was before, then met him with a fury of her own, a culmination of weeks of fear, resentment, and a terrifying, unwanted attraction. It was a battle fought with lips and hands, a struggle for dominance that left them both breathless, ragged, and fundamentally altered. It was not lovemaking, it was a collision of two stranded stars, and in its violent aftermath, a new, treacherous gravity held them together. In the days that followed, a fragile, obsessive routine emerged from the passion. He would come to her room at night, a shadow slipping into her bed. The darkness provided a cover for truths the light could not bear. In the labyrinth of his penthouse, amidst the taste of him and the feel of his scars under her fingertips, he shared slivers of his past, a father who taught him that trust was the precursor to betrayal, a first love used as a pawn against him. She, in turn, whispered her own failures, the slow-motion collapse of her dreams. It was a confession booth built of sheets and sweat, a sacred profanity. The true fracture in her perception came not from him, but from Valencia. The sleek woman cornered Lyra in the kitchen one afternoon, her voice low and precise. "The man who owned the building your cafe was in," Valencia stated, placing a fresh espresso in front of Lyra. "Marcus Brenner. He was a leech, a small-time predator who enjoyed squeezing people like you. He was also skimming profits from a shipment that belonged to Caspian. She let the words hang. Brenner's sudden retirement and the subsequent sale of his properties at a loss coincided with your arrival here. The new landlord, a corporate entity, is notoriously forgiving with late rents for certain recommended tenants. Lyra's blood ran cold. The pieces tumbled into a horrifying, clarifying picture. Her ruin had not been random misfortune. She had been collateral damage in a war she didn't know existed, chewed up by one of the minor monsters in Caspian's territory. And his solution had not been mere whimsy. He had identified a casualty created by the periphery of his own power, and in the twisted liturgy of his code, he had made restitution. He hadn't just saved a stranger. He had balanced a ledger. This revelation was still a raw, bleeding wound when Jude's asthma, thought to be managed by the pristine environment and top-tier care, staged a vicious revolt. It began in the dead of night, a cough that quickly spiraled into a terrifying, breathless struggle. The inhaler did nothing. Lyra's screams brought Caspian into the room, bare-chested, his sleep replaced by instant, terrifying clarity. While she frantically called Dr. Alves, he was already in motion. He scooped Jude from the bed, wrapped him in a blanket, and barked orders into his phone. The private elevator descended to a basement garage where a bulletproof SUV idled, Rook at the wheel. At the exclusive, discreet hospital where Thorn interests held sway, Caspian was a force of nature. Specialists appeared, not in minutes, but instantly. He bypassed all protocol, his voice a low, undeniable command that parted bureaucratic seas. Yet, when the doctors took Jude behind closed doors, the Leviathan faltered. He did not pace or shout. He simply stood in the sterile hallway, his hands clenched at his sides, his back against the wall as if holding it up. He refused to sit, refused a coat over his t-shirt, standing vigil like a sentinel carved from anxiety and granite. He said nothing to Lyra, offered no hollow comfort. But his presence was a fortress. When the head doctor emerged to say the crisis had passed, that Jude was stable and sleeping, the breath Caspian released was a shuddering thing Lyra had never heard from him, the sound of a man who had faced a loss he could not control, could not intimidate, and could not bear. He drove them home in the pale dawn light, silence once again filling the space between them. But this silence was new. It was woven with the unspoken truth of his actions, with the horrifying realization of her targeted past, and with the undeniable, terrifying fact, the anchor had become the chain, and the chain was wrapped around both their hearts. The monster had shown not just his teeth, but the vulnerable pulsing throat beneath them, and in doing so, had bound her to him in a way no debt or deal ever could. The peace that followed Jude's recovery was the fragile, crystalline kind that precedes a shattering. It was a peace heavy with unsaid words and acknowledged vulnerabilities. Caspian no longer spoke of Lyra as an anchor. The term had become obsolete, a childish name for a force he now understood was fundamental. She was his lodestar, his only fixed point in a universe of orbital betrayals and shifting alliances. He began, in his own stark way, to integrate her. He discussed logistical problems with her, not expecting input, but listening with a tilted head when she offered a perspective from the world of small business, of human patterns he'd long dismissed. He gave her a tablet linked to a secured server, a digital window into the legitimate fronts of his empire, the import companies, the real estate holdings, the charitable foundations. Understanding the mechanism, he told her, one evening as they scrolled through financial reports, is the first step toward steering it. She was no longer just a mirror or a reminder, she was an apprentice to the devil, and the education was seductive in its sheer, terrifying scope. The war, when it came, was not from the street-level rivals or the nervous debtors. It was a coup from within the upper echelons, a betrayal engineered by Silas Vane, a man whose ambition had festered for a decade in Caspian's shadow. Vane had studied Caspian's new weakness, had seen the softness coalescing around the penthouse and the child, and he struck not at the warehouses or the docks, but at the heart. The assault was a masterpiece of treachery and precision. A corrupted member of the security detail disabled a section of the penthouse's electronic defenses during a scheduled maintenance window. Vane's men, clad in black tactical gear and moving with a chilling silence, infiltrated through the service levels. The first Lyra knew of it was the sudden, total silence. The ever-present hum of the climate system died. The soft background glow of standby lights on consoles winked out. Then, the screams began, short, wet, and abruptly terminated, echoing from the lower-floor guard stations. Caspian was in his study. He didn't startle, he solidified. In one fluid motion, he pulled a compact handgun from a drawer, another from a panel behind a painting, and tossed the second to Lyra. The cold weight of it was alien and final in her hand. "The safe room," he said, his voice the calm eye of the hurricane. "Now!" They fled just as the first reinforced door groaned under a breaching charge. Jude, woken and terrified, was a silent bundle in Caspian's left arm, the gun in his right a steady extension of his will. Rook and Valencia were already a rear guard of spinning violence in the hallway, the sharp, concussive reports of gunfire painting the concrete walls with flashes of hellish light. The safe room was not a closet, but a vault embedded in the building's core, behind a section of what appeared to be a library's stone fireplace. Caspian punched a code, then pressed his palm to a scanner. The mechanism hissed open. He thrust Jude into Lyra's arms. "The code is Jude's birthday. It will seal for 12 hours. It is impregnable. There is food, water, air." His eyes, in the strobing emergency light, were pure, focused ferocity. "If I do not return," he reached into his pocket and pressed a small, cold data drive into her palm. "This contains everything. New identities. Accounts. A path to a life far from here. You press the red button inside, and in 1 hour, a car you can trust will be at the location on the screen. You will be free." It was the ultimate confession. It was the mercy he had saved her to remind him of, now offered back to her in its purest form. He was giving her the choice he had always denied himself, an escape. He turned to go, to re-enter the fray, to die in the world he had built if necessary. "Wait." Her voice was not a plea, but a command. He paused. Lyra looked from the data drive to his face, the algebra of her life resolving into a single, clear equation. The bankruptcy, the cold, the shelter, the lessons, the touch, the fear, the hospital vigil, it was not a random sequence of events. It was a forge. And she had been tempered in its heat. She pushed Jude gently towards the open vault. "Jude, sweetheart, go inside. Count to 100 for me. Don't come out until I say." The boy, wide-eyed but trusting, obeyed, disappearing into the dim interior. Lyra stepped back from the vault door, letting it swing shut but not engaging the lock. She hefted the gun, her stance awkward but her resolve absolute. "Silas is a strategist. He's studied you. He's anticipated Rook, Valencia, your defenses." She met Caspian's gaze, her own blazing with a fierce, newfound clarity. "But he has not studied me. He doesn't know that the woman who watches from the corner sees the patterns. That she knows the guard rotations you changed last Tuesday left a blind spot in the East Service corridor. That she knows you always have a secondary escape, not for you, but for a liability. He's expecting a siege. He's not expecting the liability to become a second front." For a fraction of a second, Caspian Thorne, the man who feared nothing, looked stunned. Then, a smile touched his lips, a real, ruthless, and proud smile. It was the smile of a king seeing his queen step onto the board, not as a piece to be protected, but as a player. He gave a sharp, approving nod. Together, they moved not deeper into safety, but back into the chaos. Using her knowledge of the penthouse's domestic rhythms, the laundry chute that was rarely monitored, the old servant's passage behind the kitchen she'd discovered while exploring, they flanked Silas's advancing men. Lyra did not fire the gun. She was the distraction, the unpredictable element. She triggered a fire suppression system, creating a wall of chemical fog. She led Caspian to the secondary egress, a hidden elevator to the roof, meant for her and Jude. On the windswept roof, with the city spread out below like a bed of cold jewels, the final confrontation was brief and brutal. Silas, realizing his trap had sprung backwards, met them there. The fight was a savage, personal thing, a clash of egos and betrayed history. Lyra watched, her heart a drum in her throat, as Caspian fought not with the cold efficiency of business, but with the raw, personal fury of a man defending what was his. When it was over, and Silas lay still at his feet, Caspian stood breathing heavily, the storm winds tearing at his clothes. He looked at Lyra, standing firm amidst the violence, the data drive still clutched in her hand. He walked to her, the distance between them spanning the abyss from where they began to where they now stood. He did not reach for the drive. Instead, he went down on one knee on the gravel-covered roof, a gesture both archaic and devastatingly sincere. From his pocket, he produced not a simple band, but a ring, a dark, polished stone set in heavy, knotted platinum. It was not a symbol of a sunlit promise, but of a sovereign pact. "I offer you no escape from this," he said, his voice raw from the fight but clear in the night air. "Only a place within it. Not behind me. Not beside me. With me. A partner. A queen to this dark kingdom. The mercy you brought into my life was not a weakness, Lyra. It was the cornerstone of a different kind of empire. Will you build it with me?" Lyra looked from the ring to his eyes, seeing the killer, the strategist, the protector, the man who had rerouted his entire world to balance a debt she never knew she was owed. She saw Jude's future, not in the fragile light of a normalcy that had always failed her, but in the formidable, enduring shadow of a power she now understood how to wield. She had found shelter, and within it, she had forged a throne. She extended her hand. He slid the cool, heavy metal onto her finger. It was not an answer given in love's gentle name, but in love's terrible, magnificent truth. She had chosen, not as a captive, but as an equal. The storm, at last, was hers to command. If you've journeyed through the shadows and emerged breathless from the world of Caspian and Lyra, know this is only the beginning. Darker contracts are being drawn in the underworld, and old debts have a way of resurfacing. To be the first to know when the next chapter of ruthless power and fierce, defiant love unfolds, subscribe to the channel. Your watchful eye is the only key to the next vault of secrets. Don't miss a single revelation. Subscribe now.